Hey guys, it's been a while since my last video, but I took a break. Lots of people were coming out with CZP10C videos, and most of the stuff I was thinking up, people had already covered online, so I didn't feel like adding to the noise, but got some projects I'm working on that I think some people will dig, so I'm going to test this camera setup I've got. I can work freely with my hands without banging into a tripod now. Got some better lights, got a filter to cut down on glare, so I figured a good test would be putting together the Sear cage on my SP-01 Tactical. It's the Decocker version, which is considered the biggest pain in the ass, so I figured this would be a good test, see how clearly you can see all the little parts and stuff. So I'm going to put this thing together. So what I do is I grab the mainspring pin that usually goes in here, and I'm going to use that as a slave pin. It's like the perfect size for this, and it saves me some aggravation. So take my Sear cage with the ejector facing away from me, top facing towards me, and I'll use the rounded end of the Sear pin, not the flat end, which has a flare. It's flared out so it doesn't go through the frame when you install it, and if you put it in that way, when you try to remove it later, it'll grab onto all the little parts inside, and it's kind of a pain. So always go rounded edge in. I'll just kind of hold it like a little lollipop. Grab my firing pin lifter. This is from Cajun Gun Works. It's the short reset version. It looks kind of like the Loch Ness Monster, but the factory one looks about the same. And I'll just come in from the bottom and line it up over the pin, drop it down. And I'll take my Sear and I'll hold it by this long leg like that, with the Sear nose, the part that touches the hammer hooks, facing towards me. And same thing, I'll just come in from the bottom, line it up, push the pin in. And when you put the Sear in, you want to make sure that the Sear nose is underneath this little bar right here, this bridge. Okay. So now I'm going to, keep that out of the way. So now I'm going to pull the pin back out and make a little space there for the disconnector lever. So what I'll do is, you want this triangular point facing towards you, and you want this 90-degree ledge facing in towards the towards the Sear cage. So I'll hold it by that little extension there. I'll come in from underneath, and then I'll just kind of hook it this way. And the reason I do that is because, there we go, I want that little triangular point to be above that bridge that I pointed out earlier. Okay, we want it above it so it'll work properly. All right, after I do that, I'll take that mainspring housing pin. Doesn't matter which direction because it's rounded on both ends. And then I'll push the Sear pin halfway out. So now I can make this gap here. I'm going to use that to get my springs in. So the first spring I'm going to put in is the Decocker Spring. It's this little guy right here. It's got a little 90-degree bend in one of the coils. That bend is going to be facing down away from you and to the left, because it's going to engage against the decocker leg, or the lever leg. So I'm going to make some space here, drop the spring in. What I'll do is I'll kind of catch it with my middle finger back behind it, and that'll keep it from falling out, and then just kind of get that pin to grab it. Okay, and I'll usually just push the slave pin all the way through. All right, so now I'm going to take, so what I'm going to do is push the Sear, this leg out of the way so that this can move over. And when I do that, that straight leg goes into this shallow groove here, like that. Okay. So grab my Sear pin, push my slave pin back out. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is take my screwdriver and push these both out so I have a gap here. I want this gap to be as wide as possible without losing that spring. Okay. Take my sear spring. I'm going to hold it by the long end that has that bend in it. And so it's kind of V-shaped. So the point of the V is going to go down into the sear cage. And what I'm going to do is kind of drop the long leg into that long slot while also dropping the coil into the sear, right? So after I do that, take my small screwdriver, press the coil down into the sear, not too far, and then press the slave pin over to capture it. Okay. And to make my life easier, I'm going to take this is a hammer, but you can take a piece of wood or something, and I'm going to press this pin all the way flush. Okay. So when I do that, this pin just kind of pops out, but everything is held in place. All right. So now that I've done that, I need to put tension on the disconnector lever. And we're going to do that by taking that 90-degree leg that we saw earlier. Right now it's behind the sear leg, so I got to snap it over the sear leg and then behind the the decocker leg. So let's do that. This goes behind the sear, just kind of pops over. And then for the decocker leg, you can see that point sticking out. I'm just going to take my finger, hold it in so that the leg stays back, and then just squeeze the cage between my thumb and middle finger. Now I can try to get this spring leg over. And it takes a little practice to do it just right. You got to kind of hook it. Nope. And there's quite a bit of tension on there. Yeah, come on. I usually do it on the first try, but of course, when you have a camera, it takes longer. Come on. There we go. All right. So now I've got tension on my decocker. There's obviously tension on the sear. But there's nothing keeping the Loch Ness Monster's head down. So that's the next thing we're going to do. All right, I'm going to take my punch and I'm going to push the slave pin back out to make a gap here. And I push it out. Okay, you can see there's a nice gap there. Now it's room for my lifter spring. And I've lost 2 of these already. These are really easy to lose, so be super careful with them. And the way I do it is I take the long end, and that's the end that goes in this groove here. I found that if I do it the other way, it tends to bind, and I can feel it in the trigger, so I do it this way. Oops. Let's try that again. And you got to be careful. Some people use grease to kind of help it stay in place, but I found that if you hold it right, you can just let gravity do the work. Okay, so make sure it's in that notch because it's really hard to see if it's in there once it's buried down in there. Okay, where's my punch here? Just use that to kind of get it in there properly. Okay. And then you can kind of see the coils down in there. So, pull my hammer back out. What I'm going to do is press the pin in while kind of keeping the spring out of the way. Okay. So now the pin is capturing it, but it's not all the way through, not far enough for us to be able to stick it in the gun. So what I'm going to do is press on the pin while pushing on the disconnector. Okay, so if I push the disconnector in this direction, the pin moves over and it can get all the way flush here. So now, let's see here. It's binding a bit, but I think that's just because this pin isn't fitted, isn't the right diameter. Yeah, Okay, it's on there. All right, so the frame is assembled pretty much up to the point where you would put the the D cage in. I'm not going to waste your time going through all that. There's already tutorials on it. So, sear cage goes in. Good there, yeah. Okay. There we go. Hold that in place. I'm going to take my 3/32 punch and drive out the slave pin. And I want to kind of try to do this in one motion. The reason is, if I push it out like this, right, and I keep breaking contact with it, eventually that gap might open up and allow that small spring to fly out. So, turn it around, take my sear pin, the round edge, put it back in through the frame hole. Then what I'm going to do is kind of wiggle it around until this can go in. Okay, so I'll just press in with my finger and just keep wiggling it around until it gets to about that point. Once it gets to there, I'm just going to maintain light pressure with my hand, take my hammer, start smacking it in. And I just want to make sure I don't break the connection between the punch and the pin. Once I get to about that point, I'm safe. And just take something like this cheap screwdriver and just smack it the rest of the way in. Okay. And that should pretty much be the hardest part. I'm going to go ahead and put my decocker back in, lift the sear spring out of the way, decocker snaps in. Go ahead and put my mainspring housing back in. Okay. Mainspring pin. All right, so cocked, decock to half cock, and we've got, there we go. All right, so that's it. Go ahead and put this back together. So if you needed help with your sear cage and that helped, that's the end of that part. I'm just going to put all this back together. And oh, this little guy, I was using it to keep the pins from rolling away from me, but this is a patch made by Barely Tactical, barelytactical.org. Two of my buddies and I kind of started this small internet-based t-shirt company. We sell t-shirts and stickers and patches and magazines that are laser engraved, kind of dumb stuff. Pro 2A, not uber tactical operator stuff, but you know, we take a lot of classes, we take shooting seriously, so we're kind of in that barely tactical zone, which is kind of how we started this. So if you like you know, goofy stuff like that, take a look. Okay. And before anyone asks, yeah, I started competing USPSA. I was shooting a Glock 34, and then everyone had, you know, CZs, and you know, I tried a Shadow 2 out, and I realized why everyone had CZs. But I wasn't going to spend the money on a Shadow 2 and changing all my stuff out. But this gun popped up in the on the used counter at my local range. It used to be a rental gun, and it sat right next to a Shadow 2 and a Tactical Sport. So I don't think anyone actually rented it to shoot. Like, why would you when there's a Shadow 2 next to it? So I figured the round count was low. I was going to replace all the internals anyway with Cage and Gunworks parts, so I went ahead and picked it up. Shot it, really liked it, put the Cajun parts in, and I really liked it. So this has the full Pro Kit. It's got a 10x bushing. It's got stainless guide rod, 11-pound recoil spring, 11.5-pound mainspring, trigger double action brakes at like just under 6 pounds. It's 2 pounds, 11 ounces for the single action, which is kind of a lot to get used to when you're used to a Glock or a CZP-10. Shadow 2 mag release. That's the mag release paddle from Lock Grips. These are also Lock Grips. These are Shadow 2 palm swells. There's a hidden option you can put in the comments for high top, which gives you this little bit longer extension on the palm swells. Since there's all this empty space here, I wanted the extra grip. Originally I had the CZ75 palm swells, but I didn't like the way they felt, so they let me exchange them for Shadow 2 grips. I didn't really like those, so I exchanged them for these. So they allowed me to exchange my grips twice, which is pretty cool of them. So lock grips, those guys have good customer service. As far as the Cgw Pro Kit, I replaced the trigger it came with their number 5 trigger. It's like 5 millimeters thicker, so you get a more forward positioning of your finger at the brake. It just gives me more trigger reach, feels a little bit better. Other than that, I've been shooting Outdoor Dynamics reloaded ammo, minor power factor 147. It's crazy accurate, especially with the SRO on there. So getting this set up was kind of a pain. It was my first time actually milling a slide. I took a Trijicon RMR blank. It's like a gunsmith blank. It's like just an RMR mount that's like that thick with just the mounting screws. And so I cut it down to 1/10 of an inch. Drilled and tapped the slide for M3 screws. So there's 4 M3 screws actually holding it in place. Because of the firing pin block lifter, I actually cut a hole in the top of this plate, and so the bottom of the SRO acts as the roof of this channel for the spring to go into. So I didn't deactivate the firing pin safety, because if I did, I wouldn't be legal in USPSA. And since I knew I was going to have an SRO, I didn't put a rear iron sight on there, but there is room for a forward Glock dovetail if I choose to. Up front, I needed something to hold the retaining pin in for the bushing, and I figured if I had that green fiber dot, I could use it like a shotgun bead if I ever lost the dot, and just kind of shoot that way. So, but yeah, made carry optics B class. I'm like 61.3%, so I'm just barely B class, but I'm still learning the game, so hopefully I'll get better with that. Anyway, yeah, so if you stuck around through all that, I'm not sure why you did, because I don't think I'm that interesting, but if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.